In today's video, I'm going to show you how I use continuous lights and specialty modifiers to create a glamorous old Hollywood look. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. In my work, I'm regularly inspired by old Hollywood glamour, but what I love to do is add my own twist. And I look to inspiration of the photographers of the past, the masters of this era. So for example, I'm inspired by Hurrell, Horst, Bull, but then I want to add my own interpretation. So today what I want to do is show you some of the key ingredients that I use to achieve this look. And this is going to include everything from lights to modifiers to filters, as well as post-processing. So I'm going to take you step by step as I build this scene. One of the things that you may notice is that I am shooting in a dark space, and that is going to be very important for this scene. I'm going to be using continuous lights. And continuous lights, if there's windows or overhead light, any ambient light is going to mess up my shot. It's going to affect my exposure and the mood of the image. So I begin by eliminating all unwanted light. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to choose continuous light for this shot is old Hollywood lighting was continuous lights. It was hot lights, it was tungsten. However, today we are going to be using LED lights. And the tools I'm using here are bicolor. What that means is I can vary them between daylight and tungsten white balance. And so those color temperatures are going to allow me to have a cooler look or a warmer look. For this shot, I'm going to first build in as if I'm going for something that feels authentic old Hollywood by shooting in black and white. And then later, I'll show you a twist with a modern color grade. Now that we've set the scene, let's begin by adding our main light off to the left-hand side of the frame. I'm using a Nanlite 300B, but on it, that modifier is what's going to give it this old Hollywood look. I am using a modifier called a Fresnel. And if you look at old Hollywood lighting and Mold Richardson's and all of these other tools, they were using Fresnels all the time. Now Fresnels, in the front of them, how the modifier works is there is a lens. And it's actually the same sort of lens that you would see in a lighthouse. And you'll see that that lens has all these bends and divots in it. And what it does is it allows you to have a very hard quality of light, but it's somehow a little more flattering. It's a little smoother, less specular on the skin. Another benefit of this modifier is that you can change the spread of light. I can put it so that it is flooding the scene with light, or I can narrow it down to create a spotlight. So we're going to begin with this modifier in the flood position, meaning covering more of the scene. And then later on, I can vary this to give me a tighter illumination. So let's see what we're getting with this first beautiful old Hollywood modifier. Okay, so already you can see this looks like old Hollywood glamour because the styling, the hair and makeup, as well as that light modifier. Now, when I zoom in to look at this light from the Fresnel, you can see that we have a relatively hard light cast by her jawline, even by her nose. But if you look at the texture of the light on her skin, it is still really smooth and flattering. You can also see in the flood position, we're illuminating from the top of her head, even further down to her body, almost to her feet. So now I'm going to have my assistant come in and we are going to focus or spot that light. Our main light is looking beautiful, but now we need to find a way to give dimension, some depth to the scene, separate the subject out from the background. So what I'm going to do is take a lesson from old Hollywood lighting, and I'm going to add two hard defined rim lights to carve the subject out from the background. It'll create beautiful hair light down the side of her body. And so what I'm going to be using is two Nanlite 60Cs. One is on the left and one is on the right-hand side of the frame. And on these lights, we have other Fresnels. Now these Fresnels are actually to match these Nanlite 60Cs, which are very compact. Well, so are these modifiers. They're going to give us hard and defined light that I can also focus or flood to change the spread of light in the scene. What's also nice is they have these barn doors that I can use to block the light if I'm getting too much flare, or I can open them up to intentionally create flare. So we're going to add our two rim lights. All right, so let's look at what those rim lights are doing. Look at the beautiful light on the side of her arms, the side and the top of her hair. It just pops her out from the background. Now, before we go any further, I do intend this to be a black and white, and I'll show you my color grade later on, but let's actually convert this to black and white. I'm gonna pop my contrast a little bit, and then maybe add a little bit of film grain. And so I am shooting into Capture One here, and they have some film simulations that can give me the look of a more vintage image. Now, the reason that I'm converting to black and white is that sometimes when I shoot in black and white, and then I pop the contrast. It changes what the light looks like. The shadows get darker. Maybe I need to add more fill light. So I like to envision it, how it'll actually be. Now that is going to be the benefit of shooting tethered. You can start to play around with the color and the color grading and the contrast, and then see how you might need to tweak your scene to get the end result that you desire. So I think this looks beautiful as is. And so what I'm analyzing is, I like the light on her face. I think there's a nice level of bounce light. I like the rim light, but we're losing the background. So far, I have that main light with a Fresnel, 2 rims with a Fresnel. We have one final light that is going to act as a background light back behind my subject. It is a final Nanlite 60C, and on this, there is no modifier. It is just kicking the light under the background to give us a little bit of separation. So let's add our final light. You'll notice that the background light is relatively subtle. We have it at a low power because I'm not trying to get us to look at the background, but I do want to create depth to make it look more like she's on location. So just a little kiss of light to the background is really giving us the dimension that we need. Okay, so I mentioned there are certain things that help give us the old Hollywood look. The styling, the set, the lighting, the modifiers, but I also want to add a specialty tool. Our modern day cameras and lenses are very sharp. Today, I'm shooting with a Canon R5 Mark II and the Canon 24-105 2.8 lens. Both of these are immaculately sharp, but old Hollywood lenses weren't. A lot of times they didn't have a certain coating or they were lower quality lenses. What would end up happening is you'd get something called halation, which means you'd get this glow along the highlights on the face and body, or you'd get some flare from the lights. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to degrade the quality of the lens. Not really. What we're going to do is we're going to cause things to glow a little bit more to simulate that old Hollywood look. Today I'm going to be using a Tiffin Black Pro Mist. This is a 1 strength, so this is a very strong filter. And what it does is it takes any highlights or lights in the scene and makes them bloom and glow. So let's look at the difference when I add this filter. Let's take a look at the difference between these two. This is without the filter. I do like the contrast we're achieving, but this starts to look a little bit more authentic, perhaps even a little bit filmic. Now, typically when I add this filter, I do need to add some clarity. I usually do need to add some contrast, but it's still going to give me a glowier, hazier look. Now you'll notice in the left and right hand part of the frame, I'm getting some lens flare. But that's meant to be intentional. I'm trying to give the look that we're actually on a location. Maybe there's a little bit of a smoke in the air. If I didn't want the lens flare in the corner of the frames, I could close those barn doors and limit the amount of light hitting my lens. Now, before we go get the final shot, I think this is looking pretty close to feeling authentically old Hollywood. However, I like to do my modern twist, and my modern twist would be, how about using a little bit of color? I had the beautiful red couch, the beautiful red curtains. Let's go with something with super saturated colors. So let me show you what it's looking like with the image in color straight out of camera. So this is with no adjustments, and I already really like what it's looking like. The reds are looking rich, but you'll also notice the light on her hair, it's a little bit warmer. The reason is that I'm shooting at 5600 Kelvin for my white balance. The main light, that 300B, is set to 5600, so that gives us a neutral color of light on the face. But those 2 rim lights there, those are both set to 4500 Kelvin, which means they're going to be warmer. This is the benefit of shooting with bicolor or full color lights, is I can dial in those color temperatures to create a little bit of mood and atmosphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lean into that warmth. And again, I have the filter on. This is the exact same shot as before. I'm going to add some contrast and a little bit of clarity to counteract some of the softness from that filter. Then what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to saturate some of those reds just a little bit. And then what I want to do is I want to add a little bit more warmth to the skin. I can do this by warming up the white balance a little bit more, or maybe I'll go into my color balance and add some yellows and oranges to the highlights and midtones. So let's go to the highlights. We'll add a little bit of yellow orange there, maybe a little bit in the midtone. Let me warm up my white balance just a little bit. See? Okay, and then I'm gonna bring down my highlights just a smidge. So this is the black and white version of the scene, and this is the color graded interpretation. What I did is I ended up warming up the white balance, adding the warmth to her skin, and then I added just a teeny bit of coolness to the shadows to create a little bit more pop and contrast. Now remember, as I'm shooting tethered, all of these are raw files. So it doesn't matter if what I'm seeing is color or black and white. I can always go back and change it later on. It depends on the intention of the shoot and where the final images are going to appear. All right, so with that, I'm going to direct my model and try to get a variety of different poses and expressions, and I'll have my assistant vary the spot or flood of that main light to give me even more variation. All right, let's get the shot. So there you have it, an old Hollywood glamour image using continuous lights. But remember, an old Hollywood image isn't one thing. There's no one particular modifier or particular lighting setup, but it's the mood and how all of it comes together. It's the styling, it's the lens choice, it's the lighting, it's the way that you process the file, it's all of it together. And for this, I chose to take some tips from the masters of old Hollywood by using Fresnels, hard rim lights, and a beautiful scene. So if you want to see the gear used to make these images, be sure to check out the links in the description below. And if you're really into old Hollywood lighting, I actually have an old Hollywood lighting guide that I put in the description as well that gives you 20 or more different setups inspired by this era. All right, everybody, hope you've enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.